You have to learn to depersonalize the rejection. It's not about you. You are not being rejected as a person. This really is a business where they're just trying to make money. They're not making a value judgment about your rating. Very, very good rating never gets published, and really crappy rating gets published. So this is a marketplace. And if your goal is to get published by a medium or a large publisher, then you need to pay attention to the marketplace, right? So you have to ask yourself, am I writing because I want to express myself in an artistic form?
Hi friends, this is Read and Write with Natasha podcast. My name is Natasha Tynes and I'm an author and a journalist. In this channel, I talk about the writing life, review books, and interview authors. Hope you enjoy the journey. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. Today, I'm very happy to have with me author Aggie Bloom Thompson. So Aggie started working her career as a newspaper reporter covering various beats, and her writing has appeared in newspapers such as the Boston Globe and the Washington Post. She has written 2 novels, I Do Not Forgive You and All the Dirty Secrets. Her third book, Such a Lovely Family, will be out in the spring of 2024. So, without further ado, Aggie, thank you very much for joining us today. And I would just like us to get started by you telling us a bit about All the Dirty Secrets, which happens in both of our neighborhood, which is in the Washington, D.C. area. We both live in the Washington, D.C. area, so I have a lot to relate to this book. So I'd like to hear more about the book, the process of writing, and all of that.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. This is a thriller with a dual timeline that takes place in current day Washington, D.C., but also back in the 90s. And it's really set in the private school world of Washington, D.C. And it features a very local tradition called Beach Week, which I don't know about you, but I did not grow up with Beach Week. And when I first moved to Washington, D.C., I was sort of shocked to learn about this tradition where graduating high school seniors go to the beach for a full week, paid for by their parents, and basically just party. And a lot of times their parents buy the alcohol for them. And this has been going on, for decades and decades and decades. My husband grew up in this area and he went to Beach Week for 2 years, and kids still go to Beach Week today. And when I learned about that, I just thought, oh, that would be a great setting for a murder, right? What could go wrong? All these high school students drinking unsupervised. So that's my book. There's a murder at Beach Week, a death, a mysterious death. There's private school intrigue. There's sort of secrets, the generational secrets. And then several different kind of threads, and they all weave together by the end of the book. It's really about a mother and her daughter also, and that kind of tension between mothers and teenage kids, especially girls. How much freedom do you give them? Do you read their phones? Do you allow them to make mistakes as part of growing up? Or do you interfere and, run interference? I have 2 teenagers, so these are issues I deal with all the time. So I was really interested in delving into that as well.
Interesting. So it sounds fascinating. And is it because you worked as a crime reporter? Is that why you're interested in adding the murder? Maybe because you covered crime in the past. So I'm just curious about your thought process.
Well, I think it's sort of the other way around. I think I became a crime reporter because I was interested in crime. As a girl growing up, I grew up in New York in the 70s and 80s, and there was just a lot of unbelievably horrible yet fascinating crime going on, right? I grew up during the Son of Sam serial killer. Long Island also had 2 other, Joel Rifkin, and I forget the other guy's name, 2 other serial killers. There was a lot of racial unrest. There was a Howard Beach incident. There was Crown Heights. There was Tawana Brawley. I was fascinated by Jim Jones, the cult of Jim Jones. That's not in New York, but I just was always interested in this stuff. And I read a lot of Anne Rule. She's a true crime writer. And I read a lot of fiction too. I was a huge Agatha Christie fan. And so I think when I became a reporter, I wanted to be a police reporter when I started. That's the beat I wanted to start on. So I think I just found a way, and I enjoyed it. It was really interesting. So it was natural when I started writing fiction to write thrillers.
Which kind of begs the question now, what do you think of, I've seen it through the years. I've been in the US now for 17 years. So I've seen how gradually the interest in real crime has been increasing and increasing. Like I remember when I first started watching Dateline, nobody else was watching Dateline. I was kind of the odd woman out. But then suddenly, like all these crime podcasts, Netflix is rolling one real crime after the other. True crime, especially true crime, is huge.
Right.
Why do you think that's happening? And does that also affect the sales of fiction books or a nonfiction book as well, where crime is the number one genre now?
It's a really good question. Why are we so fascinated with crime in America? I don't really I can speculate. I mean, I do think that women in particular are drawn to true crime because it's a way of sort of, I don't know, experiencing crime, but at a distance in a safe way, right? And I think part of it's just an intellectual exercise, like trying to figure out who done it. But part of it is sort of this weird, like preparation we do, right? Where we learn lessons when we read about true crime, right?
Okay.
Don't you think so? Because at the same time, all this true crime stuff is exploding. We're also seeing an explosion in books about recognizing sociopaths, recognizing psychopaths.
Yeah.
There's this feeling of, I don't know, just doing your research and learning like how to protect yourself in a way. I think women identify as vulnerable people and identify with victims in these shows. And we're sort of learning in a way. It's like a sociological thing. We're like learning in a way,
Interesting.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. It's like how you can protect yourself, how basically you learn from the mistakes of the others. And I don't know, like this fascination. I mean, all these internet memes, all of this, like, and I always laugh when I see them, like, especially for moms. Leave me alone. I want to relax with a glass of wine and a crime show.
Right.
This is how moms are relaxing at night, watching a real crime show, which is, it's an interesting trend to study. So are all your books crime focused?
Right now, yes. My first book is a thriller. My second book is a thriller. My third book is a little bit more of a traditional mystery.
Okay.
There is definitely a murder in it, but it's less psychological and more kind of a traditional whodunit.
Okay.
So yes, I'm firmly in the mystery thriller world.
Okay. So are they all based in DC?
They are. Yes.
All right. Why DC? I know you live in DC, but what? Why not like New York where you grew up?
Right.
I'm just curious. Why?
It's a really good question. When I wrote my first book, I thought long and hard about whether I would set it in New York, where I was from, or set it in DC. But, my first book was about a young mom who moves to Bethesda, and she's trying to fit into this sort of upscale Bethesda neighborhood. Not doing a great job of it. And she's framed for her neighbor's murder. That kind of, that really doesn't help her to fit in with the local mom groups. And someone takes over her social media and is impersonating her. And I thought I could really write it better in DC, that sense of being an outsider, because I'm not from DC. Whereas it didn't feel as authentic to be an outsider in New York, but I could really write about, because I had some culture shock. I don't know about you, moving to DC, and I can imagine
culture shock from New York to DC.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think a lot of people do. DC is it's really its own sort of culture. And I wanted to really explore that. And I think that's what I do in my books. They're not set anywhere. They're very specific to Washington, D.C. and the suburbs of D.C. and sort of the culture here. So my second book is as well about the private school scene. My third book is as well. So I'm really exploring sort of what goes on in DC. Well, a subset of DC, a kind of DC.
So it's mostly like Montgomery County from, and
Northwest
I guess
DC.
the east, northwest Montgomery County and the Eastern Shore. When in the book they go to Delaware.
Yes.
Okay. So what was the local reaction? Did you have like angry Bethesda moms or something?
No.
Like after reading, what was
people?
like?
It's very interesting. People really love it. I mean, people have come up to me and said and tried to guess what private school the book is based on. Washington Prep in the book, and it's not based on any private school. It's based on an amalgamation. It's just little bits and pieces of school. My husband went to private school here, and I know a lot of people who did. And so it's just based on little bits and pieces. People have told me it's not, but I've noticed like my first book was about, this mom that gets framed and how awful kind of the neighbors are in the community, and they turn on her. And, I did kind of base some of those moms on some of the moms that I knew, and nobody sees themselves in those moms. Everyone sees themselves in the protagonist, in the woman who's
as the victims.
Yes, 100%. It's fascinating. So I don't think people identify themselves as bullies or as being exclusionary or being, everyone sees themselves as a kind of the hero, as the victim.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I stay away from Bethesda. No, I'm joking. But
it's okay. I don't take it personally.
Okay. But okay. So are you doing this full time, or are you still doing the report? Okay. So we're both reporters, so it's interesting that we're questioning each other. So it makes for a fun dynamic. But so you quit journalism and you're doing
sort of. I mean, journalism kind of quit me. The last paper I worked at, which was the Montgomery Gazette, is no longer. I mean, the newspaper jobs have just really dried up. And there's a different kind of journalism that's happening now, online. But I was an old school newspaper reporter. I was a beat reporter.
Okay.
And there just isn't a lot of local news anymore, that kind of local newspaper reporting anymore. So it sort of was a mutual.
Okay, so it was like a mutual separation, like an amicable divorce in a sense. And so you made the decision after the newspaper where you worked shut down, and you decided this is it. This is like the universe telling me to do this. Did you used to write while you were working, or you just started after you transitioned from the newspaper job to the full-time writing?
I wrote my first novel in the year I graduated college, which was a long time ago, in the 90s. Okay. And this is back when you would write a novel and print it out on paper and put it in a box and go to the post office and mail it off. It was a huge deal. This is pre-internet, and I actually managed to get an agent in New York. I was working in New York as a bartender and a waitress, and I wrote this novel, and I got an agent, and we almost got published, and it didn't happen. And
what happened? I want to know the story.
Oh, so the whole story is, I remember there was an editor at one of the big 5 houses, and she loved it, and she took me out to dinner. And she took me out to a steak dinner at like this really cool New York. Yeah. Okay. And she was wearing this fake leopard skin coat, and she had red lipstick. And I just thought she was the coolest thing ever. She was so glamorous to me, and I thought, this is it. I've made it, and I had steak and everything. And she was just gushing about how much she loved my book, and could I just make these changes?
Okay.
And I did. I lived in this studio apartment on East 11th Street. And I I made my changes. I like hunkered down in this tiny, tiny studio. And it was a crazy time. It was the 90s in New York with like just a lot of drugs and crime. And, there's like a guy shooting up outside my door. And I just wrote this novel. I rewrote it and I sent it off to her. And I didn't hear back. No phone call, no letter, because of course there's no email. And so eventually my agent sort of like pressured her. And she came back and said, I'm really heartbroken to tell you this, but I couldn't sell it to so when you sell a novel, it's not just the editor who has to like it. That editor has to take it to the entire company and has to pitch it to all the other editors and to marketing and to publicity and get everybody on board. And if other people aren't convinced, especially marketing and publicity, that they can market it, then it's a no-go. So she came back and said, I couldn't sell it to everybody.
Okay.
And then she said to me, my boss says Gen X is dead.
Wow, that's harsh.
But send us your next novel, please.
Okay.
And I was like, my what? My next novel, right? I didn't understand the words and I didn't know what to do. So I became a newspaper reporter.
And then...
Yes. And then while I was a newspaper reporter, I wrote a second novel.
Okay.
And the same thing happened.
All right.
And then...
It's brutal out there.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
And then, I was married, kids, life. I was working at the Gazette in Montgomery County outside DC. And it was the summer of 2013. And I spoke to my father on the phone, and my father told me that he was dying of lung cancer and he had 6 months to live. Yeah, it was really devastating. I started crying and he said, don't cry for me. I've done everything I've wanted to do in my life. Like, I love my career. I've had a great family. I've traveled. I'm not sad. I've done what I wanted to do. And I remember just thinking, I can't say that. If I were to get a diagnosis, I can't say I've done everything I wanted to do. So I started taking a class called the Extreme Novelist.
I took that one at the
Writer's
Writer Center.
With Katherine Johnson?
With Katherine Johnson, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I did that.
So you know this class. This class is like a boot camp.
I loved it, yeah.
It's not a traditional writer's class where you talk about metaphor, dialogue, or language. It's why haven't you written your pages? How many pages do you have this week? This is how to write a query letter. And I wrote a novel in that class. Well, I started the novel in the class and then I finished it afterwards. And it was an international thriller. And I loved it. It was about a young female diplomat. And I got an agent pretty easily, and the agent took it out.
Sorry, how did you get the agent? Let's not bury the lead.
Sure.
How you got the agent?
So in Bethesda, just ironically, like luckily for us, there is a conference every year in the spring called it's run by the Washington Review of Books or Washington something or other. Yeah. It's over at the Marriott, I think. Near,
the Washington Writers Conference or something like this.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, okay.
So this is one of these typical conferences that has maybe 50 agents show up and you pay and you go, and there may be speakers speaking, but the real draw of it is what's called a pitch fest, where you go and it's like speed dating and you sit down and you pitch. You have 2 minutes to pitch your book to an agent. If the agent likes the way it sounds, they give you their card and say, send me your manuscript. And if it's not for them, then they say it's not for me. And you can kind of request which agents you want based on, what kind of books they take and what kind of books they don't take. So I met my agent at the Pitch Fest, and I'd like to just point out for people that I did not pitch to my agent inside the room at the Pitch Fest. I was just getting coffee and an agent was there, and I said, oh, hi. And we started talking, and I pitched to her at the coffee station. That's the woman who ended up being my agent. So you should just pitch to everybody, is my point. Don't only pitch during the Pitch Fest. Like anytime you see people, be ready to pitch. And I sent her the book and she loved it and she took it out and we just got rejections across the board. And they were
Which
really,
one?
really
Was it
nice.
this one or the one before it?
No. It was called The Diplomat, and it was about an international thriller about a diplomat. And the rejections we got were, we love the writing, we love the story, but women don't buy international thrillers, and men don't buy international thrillers with female protagonists.
Oh, geez. Okay.
We don't know how to market this, right?
Oh, wow.
Can you believe it? So
I read international thrillers. That's,
yeah.
But it's
do they have any female protagonists?
No. But I don't care. I mean, honestly, I like the concept of international. But anyways, enough about me. Let's go back.
I agree. I completely agree. I think that someone's going to write that first international thriller with a female protagonist. It's going to break through, but it just wasn't me, right? Okay. So I was told, do you ever write domestic thrillers? Do you ever write psychological thrillers? And I said, okay. I love to write. I love to read psychological thrillers and domestic thrillers. So I wrote what became my first published book, but was my fourth book, called I Don't Forgive You. And I went back to my agent and I sent it to her, and she didn't respond for like a month. And I reached out to her and she said that she didn't really like it and that she didn't think it was competitive.
Okay.
And it was a really low point for me. I mean, I remember thinking,
it's heartbroken. It's heartbreaking. I mean, it's
I said, maybe I should just, I said, I guess this one doesn't work. I should write another one. And it was my husband who said, no, you should fire your agent and get a new agent. And I was like, you can do that? Right? Because you know what it's like when you finally get an agent, you don't want to lose it. It's like having a date for the New Year's Eve party. It's like, you don't want to break up right before the New Year's Eve party. Like, who you go to the party with? Like, it's never a good time to break up with your agent. But actually, I believe that it's better to have, it was the best thing that happened to me, it turns out.
Okay.
Because I ended up with my really amazing, amazing agent, Katie Shea Boutillier at the Donald Moss Agency. And
how did you find her? How did you find her?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. The way I found her.
Why are you afraid? I want to hear the story. Yeah.
Okay. So my book, I thought she was wrong. I thought the book was good, but I thought the fact that she had such a strong negative reaction meant that I was missing something that I didn't see. Okay. So I went back through all my rejections and I found my best rejection. It was like, if there's a best rejection, it was like a glowing, we love your writing, we love your voice, but we just don't see a market for this. And I said, I'm going to ask this editor what I should do. So I looked up the editor and she was no longer at that publishing house. Okay. And I was like, I'm going to find this editor. I don't care if she's like, working on a goat farm in Montana. Like, I'm going to find her and ask her what I should do. It turned out that she had become an independent editor, or an editor for hire, which is someone that writers pay to look over their manuscripts and help them develop, like developmental editors. So I reached out to her and I told her my situation. And she said, she asked to see a sample, and she read the sample. And she said, I'd love to work with you and read this. And so I hired her, and she did a read, and she made one suggestion that was really good that changed the book. I mean, it was something that was sort of obvious in retrospect, but I didn't do it. And I took her advice and I rewrote the book based on this one suggestion. And she thought it came out so well that she pre-pitched my book to about a dozen agents that she knew, right? That she had relationships with from when she had been working at a publisher. And of those 12, 4 of them made offers. So it was a really great situation. Wow. And that's how I got my really great agent. Yeah.
So it's pretty much a story of resilience. I mean, all of the rejections, you were so close, with the steak dinner and all of that. And then, that happened. It's an inspiring story of resilience and how you talked to your dad and he told you. So like basically it's the story behind the story, that's what I love this podcast, is to hear how you reach to this. People just see the book and, they don't know what happens behind the scene, all the
Right.
rejections, all the tears, all of the heartbreaks. And like,
Yeah.
I'd love to everyone to hear that story. So this one was published by, I see the publishers, Forge, right? That's
Forge.
Forge. And all of them were the same publisher? Just curious.
Yes. Forge is an imprint of Macmillan, which is one of the big four publishers.
Okay, yeah, because
working now, yeah.
Okay, so that's a great publisher. So they took 3 of your books.
Yeah, well, actually 4. I just signed a 2-book deal. So I have a book coming out in 2024, and then I've signed for a 4th book after that.
Wow. Okay, so now this takes me to your work style, so now you're a full-time author. Yes. So I speak to a lot of authors on this podcast and publishers and agents, and the majority of them told me that being a full-time author this time is not sustainable, and they needed another job to supplement it. But I think in your case it's different because you already paid your dues in life, and this is kind of the second phase. So
I want to be completely upfront. Yeah, like my husband is the primary breadwinner.
Okay.
I don't think it's actually unsustainable to be a full-time writer, especially if you count in movie rights. You're not going to be a millionaire, but you can make a decent living.
So do you agree with them that unless you're Stephen King or, if you're completely on your own, would you be able to sustain this lifestyle of churning one book after the other? Or is that dream of becoming the next Stephen King is dead?
For me, let's just put it this way. I make more money as a published author than I ever did as a newspaper reporter.
Yeah, because newspaper reporters don't get paid.
It isn't saying that much, right? It's not saying that much. But so for me, it doesn't feel, like I'm making less money now, right? It feels... Okay. Yeah. I'm not, like I said, I'm not breaking into like some millionaires club or anything, but
okay.
I feel fine.
Okay.
I'm making my contribution. And, but I know that a lot of authors get very small advances and don't sell movie rights and don't make that kind of money. I agree that like you shouldn't set out thinking that this is I had the cushion of my husband works and I'm part of a long, 20 something year marriage. But yeah, I wouldn't like set out, like when I wrote my first book, I was bartending and waitressing. Like I wouldn't set out to have that be my sole income. And it's certainly an income that changes every year. So you need a cushion. You need something, either a supportive spouse or a part-time gig or something else to help you, because it's pretty unpredictable actually what, your income is going to be. Yeah. And you can have a big advance on one book and then the next book get a very small advance. Like it's not necessarily doesn't necessarily follow that just because your first book got a big advance, your second book will get a big advance.
So for me is, okay. So I'm gonna now assume that your books are selling well, based on what you just told me. So how are you marketing them? I know like you published with one of the big four, so they help you with that, but what kind of work you're doing yourself to promote the books, especially in the DC area, since they're based they're mostly about the DC area.
So when the books actually come out, I do things. So for this summer, for example, I was lucky enough to have the launch at Politics and Prose, which was great and was not an easy thing to get.
Okay.
Because even though I adore Politics and Prose and have been a member for more than 20 years, they don't necessarily always host local authors, as you probably might have noticed. They view themselves more as a national bookstore, and that is our bookstore. So it can be hard. So that was a great thing. You try to get, I have a great publicist at Forge who does a lot of really great things, and they're trying to get sort of national stuff. She got, or I don't know actually how this happened. I'm assuming she did this. I got placed into 2 subscription boxes.
Okay.
One was a Love Lit box up in Canada, and one was at the Bethany Beach bookstore. They have monthly subscription boxes for members. And so my book was chosen. That's a really good thing. I went out to the beach and I did media out at the beach, and I did appearances at both bookstores out there, Bethany Beach Books and Browse About Books in Rehoboth. I did Delaware Public Radio, because it takes place partially on the Delaware shore. I did lots of radio this time. I hired this really great woman who helped me kind of do a lot of Instagram stuff and online stuff. I've hired her myself, and she's a really wonderful woman. And she kind of helped me do like a big burst of activity right around the time the book came out. But then after that, I don't really do anything, to be honest. Like after that big burst of activity.
Yeah. Are you active on social media or not? Not that. Yeah.
Yeah. I have an Instagram account and I have a Facebook account. I wouldn't go so far as to say I'm active. I touch base, around my launch. I'm very active. The month before my book comes out, and then the month after my book comes out, I'm on Instagram almost every day.
Okay.
But I find, for me personally, social media to be really detrimental to my mental health. It's like, it's no bueno. It is not good. So I really try to do as little as possible. And it's a great time suck also. And there's something very depressing about it to me, to be honest. Just looking at everybody's, successful, amazing experiences. They don't need that in my head. So I'm very protective of my headspace, especially when I'm writing. And so I try not to take in that kind of stuff.
So how do your readers reach out to you?
Yes, they do. And I do book clubs. I just did a book club on Zoom about a week ago, and I did an in-person book club a week before that. And I got the nicest card the other day from this random, where is it? I don't know. From this random reader. It was the cutest thing. It was just like something your grandma would send you. It was like a little flowered card, like, in script, like, I really loved reading your book. And so that's so nice when you get things like that.
Ah, cool.
I do get random emails.
I have a book club, and we invited local authors a number of times. So maybe we can talk about inviting you as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're all in Montgomery County area. So
cool.
Be fun. All right. So will you ever consider self-publishing? I know you're very successful traditional publisher. Just to cut the middleman.
I would, actually.
You would? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. I thought you would just say absolutely not. But I'm okay. So
no. I'm not an organizational genius. That's the only problem. Okay. Like I'm not a numbers person or a tech person. That's kind of the thing that would hold me back. Okay. But I do think there are particularly certain kinds of books and genres that really lend themselves to self-publishing, obviously series, right?
Yeah.
So I do, I could totally imagine it. I just don't know if I'd be any good at it. That would be my major hurdle. But yeah.
I mean, you can always hire somebody to help you. Yeah.
There's something kind of wonderful about just putting it out there and not worrying about,
I mean, having all the control, having access to the numbers, having access to the earnings, having say over the cover, having just, all the control is very empowering. And just curious, is even after all of your success, you would still consider self-publishing. So what is your writing routine?
My routine? I don't have a daily routine. I do walk my dog for a couple miles each morning. And then in theory, I come back and start writing, you know, but that doesn't always happen. I have a lot going on in my life with my kids. I have some health issues. I live with some health issues. So like, I don't put that kind of pressure on myself, to stick to a routine every day. I have a general routine in terms of how I write a novel, which is I write. First of all, I don't sit down until I have something to write.
Okay.
I don't waste time staring at a blank screen.
Okay.
This is my approach. I don't write through my problems. I don't write, and then realize there's only one good sentence and throw it all away.
Okay.
Right. Like when I sit down to write, I'm pretty serious. I'm putting words on the page that will almost definitely end up in the book.
Okay.
And then, so if that means I have to spend a lot of time thinking about it or taking notes, I can show you really quickly on my wall. I have all these huge, do you see that?
No, it's
huge
a bit blurry.
Post-it notes.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, huge Post-it notes with,
okay. Ideas and
with like plot lines and timelines. Yeah. So I do a lot of brainstorming and I come up with kind of a really good sense before I sit down to write.
okay.
And then
Okay.
I write and I've got something that looks very skeletal, on the computer. It's maybe 50,000 words, 40,000 words. And I print that out. And then I sit down with like a lot of colored markers and pens and sticky notes. And I start going through the book because I tend to underwrite. So then I start going through the book and filling in what needs to be filled in. And then I type all that back into the computer. And that I consider to be my second draft. And then I go through that one more time to make sure, my books are very complicated in terms of plot. So just make sure everything is lining up. Everything makes sense. And then that's my third and final draft.
How long does it take you to finish one novel?
8 months, six months, depending what's going on in my life,
Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah,
people can take years.
Yeah.
So who inspires you? Who are the authors that you kind of steal from, or, if, the authors that really because all of us steal from other writers and we add our own touches. And so who do you try to imitate, and someone that, you like their style and try to imitate their style?
Well, I remember with my first book, I read a lot of Harlan Coben to try and just figure out how does he keep you turning those pages, right?
Okay.
Like if you've ever read any Harlan Coben, you know that you have to keep reading. Right. And so I think I did a fairly good job. Like I learned some stuff. And my first book is that kind of book where you have to keep turning the pages. And then I love Agatha Christie. I love her for her cleverness. I like the way she murders people. I like her plots.
Okay.
I love Laura Lippman.
Yeah.
I think she's an excellent writer. I enjoy Leanne Moriarty, who's sometimes more comical than like a little bit less, thrillery, but I really enjoy her stuff as well. So there's a lot of writers who I kind of crib from, depending on what I'm looking for. Like when I'm looking for emotional resonance in my book, I read memoirs, right?
You read what?
So
memoirs.
Memoirs, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I find that memoirs teach me how to write about emotion.
Yeah.
Teach me how to think about emotion in a way that that probably is my weak point, is writing about emotion.
Yeah.
And that memoirs are great for that. And I read a lot of nonfiction too, to kind of learn about whatever it is I'm writing about as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we conclude, we have a few minutes. Any tips for aspiring authors? I like always to end with that because many, some of the people who watch are, want to get into this field. They might be scared of all the rejections. They might, and fighting imposter syndrome or others. What are your top tips, in addition to whatever, read or whatever, something that really you think everyone should know about, and maybe people do not talk about it, maybe people are ashamed to say that I got rejected, so just really tips that would help them understand what they're really getting into and how they can combat all these fears.
First of all, I would say to my younger self, and to anyone who's starting out, that you have to learn to depersonalize the rejection. It's not about you. You are not being rejected as a person. This really is a business where they're just trying to make money. They're not making a value judgment about your rating. Very,
Okay.
very good rating never gets published, and really crappy rating gets published. So this is a marketplace. And if your goal is to get published by a medium or a large publisher, then you need to pay attention to the marketplace, right? So you have to ask yourself, am I writing because I want to express myself in an artistic form? Do I want to tell the story of this little girl, blah, blah, blah? Or am I writing because I want to get published? And those are two different goals. Now, maybe by some stroke of, miracle, you'll write your own story that also gets published. But if early on you decide, I want to write this beautiful story the way I want to write it, or I want to write and get published. And if you want to write and get published, you really should start paying attention to the market. What is getting published right now? And if you want to write a thriller, or you want to write romance, or you want to write fiction, go to the library. What are the new releases? Don't read what got published 5-10 years ago. That is irrelevant to you. Read what's getting published today. What are the debut books that are getting published today? And that will tell you what's happening. Think of it more like a business. What's being marketed, what's being actively bought and sold right now, right?
So can you give us examples of what is being published right now?
Right. So I think what I'm saying is, like, a lot of people will say, oh, I love John Irving, right? The World According to Garp is one of my favorite novels. Okay, when was that published? 1980, 1970 something?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's irrelevant to getting published today. It's not irrelevant to writing if you love writing. But if you want to get published today, what are they buying today? And I don't know that. Like, if I were trying to get published right now for the first time, I would go to the library and I would look and see what are the debut books that came out this year, right? What are editors buying? What did they buy last year? And what's coming out this year? And I would look very specifically in my genre, science fiction or young adult or whatever. And I would really, it doesn't mean you're copying. It doesn't mean you're, imitating, but it's an awareness. You got to be somewhere in the mix of what's happening, because one of the first questions an agent will ask you is, what are the comp titles of your book? What two books does this book fall between on a bookshelf? You've heard that question?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of course. Yeah, so, I pitched before. Yeah.
Yeah. So it can't be something that came out 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or definitely not 20 years ago. I mean, people talk about Stephen King all the time. Forget Stephen King. He started writing in the 70s. Like, who started last year who got published? That's who you should pay attention to. And then distance yourself from the rejection and view it more as kind of a numbers game, right? You got to send out a certain number of queries. You got to do the work. You got to accumulate those rejections. We all have.
Yeah.
And I also think, as my story shows, if you have any kind of human connection with people, that beats just trying to do things on email. So writing conferences are a great place to go. Pitch fests are a great thing to do. Make a human connection with an agent. Smile, talk to them. Keep up a correspondence with them. And I think that those agents will always read your queries above agents who have never met you.
Yeah, that's true. Or you drop a name, like, I was referred to you by this person or by that person.
Absolutely.
That always helps. Yeah.
And don't be afraid. I mean, and the other thing is, don't be afraid to join groups that are supportive of writers. Like, there are a lot of really good as much as I hate Facebook, there's a lot of really good Facebook groups for writers. And this doesn't mean that you have to share your work. I mean, I know there's one called On Submission, for example. And this is for people who have written and are going out on submission. I bet there are ones that are just for people who are in earlier stages than that. And these aren't necessarily places where you share your work, or you can. Oh, I know one. So if you're writing thrillers or mysteries, there's an organization called Sisters in Crime, and they have a chapter for unpublished and sort of beginning writers. They're called Guppies. It's the Guppy chapter. And you can find critique partners. You can ask questions. It's a really good resource. But go out there and connect with other beginning writers. Go out there and try to find some community, because they're out there. you won't be as alone, when you get those rejections, you'll understand that everybody's experiencing it too. It's not personal. It's not you. It's not you. Yeah.
Well, this been fascinating. Any last thoughts, comments you want to share before we conclude?
Oh, I think this is sort of a golden time to be writing,
Is it?
between
Oh,
I do think so. I think
okay.
there's with self-publishing and even with, the big, they're only being big four companies. There are lots of little imprints. There are smaller independent presses. I think that, don't have a narrow definition of success, like if you
Yeah.
want to write and get your writing out there, there are ways to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we don't all have this one very narrow version of success.
Yeah. True. Well, this been a great conversation, and I really enjoyed all the tips and the advice, and also your personal stories about about your resilience and how you got published. So thank you so much for joining us, and for anyone who's listening or watching. Aggie's book is called All the Dirty Secret. I actually saw it
Yeah.
at Barnes and Noble the other day, by the way, and I was like, I got so excited when I saw it at Barnes and Noble.
Yay.
Yeah, so
Come find me on my website. It's aggiebloomthompson.com. I am on Facebook. I am on Instagram, and you can sign up for my newsletter and just come say hi. I do love hearing from readers.
so thank you very much, and thank you
Thank you.
everyone for listening or watching to another episode of Read and Write with Natasha.